Hi there. So without any ado, I will now compare PDA to borderline personality disorder, or BPD, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder. As I mentioned in the previous video of this three-part series on the comparison of PDA and cluster B personality disorders, I am not proposing that PDA is a personality disorder, as it is widely accepted as being grounded in autism and should be regarded as such. I simply intend to point out the similarities between PDA and cluster B personality disorders and how it differs. Right, so let's crack on then, shall we? As with NPD, BPD is a personality disorder and not an autism spectrum disorder or autism spectrum condition, unlike PDA. At no point does the DSM state that individuals with BPD must exhibit difficulties in social communication and social interaction, or restricted or repetitive behaviours, routines and activities, and perhaps also sensory problems, in order to meet the diagnosis. I should add here that due to BPD patients' wide range of extreme symptoms, social interaction may be impacted or hindered, but the fundamental ability to socialise is not necessarily impaired, as it would be in an autistic individual. As for the causes of BPD, it is suggested that individuals who go on to develop BPD are born with a genetic predisposition towards the condition, and the risk is heightened when these genes interact with certain environmental factors, such as being neglected by one or both parents, or being subjected to physical, psychological, or sexual abuse from a young age. As with NPD, there are 9 diagnostic criteria for BPD, and a person must possess at least 5 of these traits in order to warrant a diagnosis. Before I go on, I failed to mention in my last video that where narcissism is more commonly observed in males, borderline personality disorder is more commonly observed in females. Now, as there are many similarities between PDA and BPD, and thus almost making the two very difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish, I have had to be extra nuanced in this video, so bear with me and I will try and explain things as best I can. The 9 traits of BPD are often broken down into 4 domains. Domain A: excessive, unstable and poorly regulated emotional responses. Trait 1: affective, emotional instability, including intense, episodic, emotional anguish, irritability and anxiety or panic attacks. Trait 2: anger that is inappropriate, intense and difficult to control. And trait 3: chronic feelings of emptiness. Domain B: impulsive behaviours that are harmful to you or to others. Trait 4: self-damaging acts such as excessive spending, unsafe and inappropriate sexual conduct, substance abuse, reckless driving and binge eating. And trait 5: recurrent suicidal behaviour, gestures, threats or self-injurious behaviour such as cutting or hitting yourself. Domain C: inaccurate perceptions of yourself and others, and high levels of suspiciousness. Trait 6: a markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of yourself, your perceptions of yourself, your identity. And trait 7: suspiciousness of others' thoughts about you, and even paranoid ideation or transient and stress-related dissociative episodes during which you feel that you or your surroundings appear unreal. And finally, for domain D, tumultuous and unstable relationships. Trait 8. You may engage in frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. And trait 9, your relationships may be very intense, unstable, and alternate between the extremes of over-idealizing and undervaluing people who are important to you. Now, much of what I just listed can be, and is often found, in PDA. Superficially, the two conditions could appear the same here in many ways, but if we dig a little deeper, might we find that the behaviours are arrived at from different origins, and thus have different drivers? Well, perhaps. Where emotional lability from meltdowns to utter euphoria clearly exists in both, and is largely contingent upon perception, events, and doomed interactions with people, the fundamental triggers may differ. The BPD person and the PDAer both have problems with a sense of identity, hence the chronic inner emptiness. As we know, the PDAer, as well as sometimes feeling empty inside, has a panoply of selves, continuously superseding one another depending on the environment. The PDA child might remedy this inner malady by taking on various roles in social situations, such as pretending or becoming the teacher or parent within their peer group. The PDAer is prone to withdrawing into fantasy, sometimes to the extent to which the lines that separate reality and fantasy, that separate reality from fantasy, can be blurred. The fantasy world can appear as real life itself, and may be mistaken as such. The BPD person, on the other hand, may experience the total opposite. Due to paranoia or dissociative episodes, the BPD person may negate true reality and deem it false. The BPD person is hypersensitive to real or perceived abandonment, and as a result is constantly on high alert, much like how the PDAer is when on the lookout for demands. But despite the BPD person's desperate need to avoid abandonment, they often seem to behave in ways that would almost certainly guarantee abandonment. The BPD person finds the very thought of abandonment gut-wrenching and terrifying, much like how the PDAer views the loss of freedom or control. Both are impelled to act in obscene, socially unacceptable and self-destructive ways in order to stave off that which they fear the most: loss of freedom or control for the PDAer, and abandonment for the BPD person. Both may resort to self-injurious behaviour and flirt with suicidal ideation. Both may wish to end their own lives due to not fitting in, or because life with their respective conditions is just too unbearable. But the BPD person is ultimately driven by their need to avoid abandonment, and the PDAer is driven by their fear of not being free or in control. We could view the chronic feeling of emptiness arising in the PDAer upon losing their life force, freedom, and we could view this chronic feeling of emptiness arising within the BPD person upon feeling abandoned. Where the PDAer deals with this by exerting control on the outside world, namely people, to restore their sense of freedom, the BPD person may be drawn to behaviours such as binge drinking, reckless spending, or unrestrained promiscuity, perhaps as a way of filling up that part of themselves that feels empty, so as to not feel so alone and in the dark. Of course, the PDA adult will be prone to such behaviours as well. But what of the BPD person's relationships being of an unstable and intense nature? The PDAer certainly exhibits this trait to a T. Both are prone to what is referred to in psychology as splitting, or black and white thinking, seeing things or people as either good or bad with very little, if not no room for nuance. Over-idealizing or devaluing people based on what the PDA or BPD person view as necessary for survival or a threat to survival. If a person has a generally demanding or authoritative air about them, the PDA is likely to spark an instant hatred for said person. If a person whom the PDA values blunders by accidentally or deliberately placing a demand on the PDA can pendulum from impassioned love for a person to a fiery hatred for them in a nanosecond. This person has now become a threat source whom the PDA must avoid at all costs, until the PDA ceases to regard the person as a threat to their level of freedom. A BPD person can honour and worship a person who feels the same way towards them, until this person reminds the BPD person of their chronic inner emptiness, in which case the BPD person will have to discard or attack the person who is making them feel such a way. Social obsessions are a main characteristic of the PDA profile, but these, despite being intense and likely leading to relationships of an unstable nature, might also have more of an autistic feel. What I mean by that is, a person to the PDA can become a project or a special interest, and does not just serve as an abandonment avoidance tool. While BPD people are capable of love, they may be more preoccupied with or interested in what a person can give to them than the person themselves. If a person with whom the BPD individual is intimate fails to nourish the BPD person with that which they crave, or feels as though they need to distance themselves for whatever reason from the BPD person, or if the BPD person is simply paranoid that a person with whom they are intimate is distancing themselves when in reality they are not, this could unveil the BPD person's chronic inner emptiness, inevitably triggering their sense of abandonment. The BPD person could easily write said person off and go and look for nutrition from another source, the source being the person. But the person is irrelevant. It's what they can offer the BPD person that matters. The BPD person may sometimes appear as though they are flattering a certain individual, treating them kindly, lavishing them with gifts, etc., doing grand gestures for them, but this is merely superficial, as their hidden agenda or ulterior motive is quite clear. Do what is necessary to keep this person close in order to avoid abandonment. The PDA has a complex relationship with people in that they have affective or emotional empathy and are capable of truly loving someone, yet at the same time have it in them to control, manipulate, and objectify people. The sheer fact that people, unlike inanimate objects, are endowed with free will and sentience can make them an irresistible conquest to the control-hungry PDA. During times of depression and solitude, the PDA may long for the opportunity to love and connect with another human being, while still wanting someone or something to help satisfy their control need, whereas BPD people may long for the same, with the additional need for someone to need them. Okay, I think we've covered enough on this topic for one day. I hope you now have a better idea of how the two conditions are similar to each other and how they differ from one another. Stay tuned for my next video, in which I will compare PDA and antisocial personality disorder. On a final note, I would like to thank everyone who attended the PDA experience on Saturday in Cardiff. For those of you who didn't make it for whatever reason and would have liked to, worry not, as Cassandra Davis from PDA action, Sally Catt, the PDA meme queen and author of PDA by PDAers, and I are hosting an event which will take place on Saturday the 27th of April in Exeter, Devon. For more details and or to purchase tickets, please follow the link to the Eventbrite page in the video description below. I hope to see some of you there. That will do for today.